Let the room grow still, let the stars take their place. Press the bell and the night will begin to tell its tales. You arrive loud, before words, before memory. You don't enter the world, you storm into it. Fists clenched, eyes blazing, lungs announcing your arrival with 7 straight minutes of fury. That's what they still talk about, even now. The midwife swears no child ever roared so long without taking a breath. The priest, who came to bless you, left with teeth marks on his finger and a nervous laugh. From day one, you weren't soft like the other Viking children. You didn't coo, you growled. You didn't nap. You stared at the ceiling like it had betrayed you. Something ancient stirred in you. Something wild. The goat won't come inside when you cry, which is often. You've bitten the sheep, challenged your own shadow, and glared a thunderstorm into retreat. You don't mean harm, not exactly. But there's a flame inside you that doesn't dim. Not even when you sleep. They start calling you bear cub. Your father says you'll grow out of it while nursing a bruised shin. You crush wooden toys like they insulted your honor. And when given a carved horse, you snap it in half and declare war on the stump. Your favorite pastime? Screaming at trees. One time you challenged a rock to a duel. You lost barely, but your cousin had to pull you off mid-battle with a spoon. The whispers begin early. Cursed? Some mutter. Spirited? Say the kinder ones. The shaman insists you've got fire in your blood. Your grandmother says it's probably worms. Either way, by age 4, you've been banned from the mead barrel and given a wide berth at the village feast. You broke the ladle once, and no one is quite sure if it was on purpose. But when thunder rolls, you laugh, like an old god remembering a joke. You've taken to carrying a stick you named the enemy. You talk to it. It doesn't talk back. Yet, you don't belong in a quiet world of nets and ropes and fish drying in the sun. You're not built for calm. You're built for chaos. Not in the way of villains or tyrants, but in the way of storms. And everyone knows it. You're a whirlwind wrapped in a child's body. Most Viking children learn ropes and runes. You learn momentum. You break your first sword before you ever swing it in training. Just one wild breakfast and it splinters. The house sways. Your father just sighs. You're not allowed near the chickens. First it was curiosity, then combat. You challenged the rooster. He won. You declared a rematch. Now you walk with a feather in your braid like a trophy and call yourself victor of the co-op. No one argues. By 6, you're a legend in the making. You craft your own shield from a broken barrel lid and charge headfirst into the laundry lines. Your mother calls you storm spawn. Your grandmother tells travelers you're a vessel for an old warrior's spirit. You tell everyone you just wanted to see what would break first, your shield or the pole. Spoiler, it was the pole. There's no cruelty in you, just a relentless, fearless energy that demands space. If it stands, you test it. If it runs, you chase it. If it talks, you interrupt it. It's not that you disobey, it's that you move faster than rules can form around you. The village adjusts. They build stronger fences. They teach their children to admire from a distance. One child calls you goat-trained. You tackle him into a snowbank. The name Snowbreaker sticks. You wear it like armor. Your truest companion is a scruffy sheepdog named Rick. He doesn't fear you. He understands you. When you climb too high or leap too far, he's there to catch or bark or drag you back from the edge. One time you tried scaling the fish racks to train your balance. You fell. The fish broke your fall. You still smell like haddock when it rains. Elders occasionally suggest spiritual guidance. The temple says no thanks. And so you remain. A storm in boots too small, a myth not yet written. No one teaches you to restrain. No one dares. Because some spirits weren't meant to be calmed. They were meant to lead charges, carve paths, and turn quiet nights into tales. And you were born for battle. You just haven't found the war yet. You aren't growing into a farmer. That much is certain. By 7, everyone in the village has stopped wondering what's off about you and started whispering about how to redirect whatever this force inside you is. Ideally toward their enemies. You don't walk. You charge. You don't jump in puddles. You demolish them like they insulted your ancestors. And when storms roll across the sky, you stare up at them like they owe you an apology. You eat like you're preparing for a siege, not supper. At one feast, you devoured 3 boiled eggs, 2 fish cakes, and a chunk of what turned out to be the decorative centerpiece before anyone realized it wasn't part of the meal. You were halfway through chewing on a ladle by then. Bruises and scrapes are your second skin. You collect splinters like other boys collect stories. The village healer no longer tries to fix you, just gives you a gentle pat and says, "Aim softer next time." You've developed a laugh, a deep, echoing sound not rooted in joy, but in the strange thrill of chaos. You laughed that way after falling off a rooftop, cracking a barrel, a crate of onions, and a bone. You called it the best day of your life. You name your sticks things like Skull Tickler and the Bone Choir. You duel trees with them. Some trees lose. No one gives you chores anymore. Tasks end in fire or splinters or philosophical debates about why the bucket had to be whole in the first place. Once you burned your own tunic just to test how quickly it caught flame. It did. You don't wear that style anymore. The elders start speaking of you not in concern, but in reverent suspicion. Touched by Odin, they murmur, or maybe just raised on too much goat milk. Either way, wolves give you space. Birds flee when you pass. You are not simply a child anymore. You are becoming something else. Something remembered. Something warned about. At 10, someone finally suggests formal training. It's unclear who suggested it because no one wants the job. Eventually, a scarred, one-eyed warrior named Gore the Limp volunteers, either out of pity or a misplaced sense of duty. Gore's teaching style involves shouting from a distance while you whirl your weapon at straw dummies, fences, or wandering chickens. He doesn't correct your form because you don't have form. You have force. You have fury. You have the determination of a child who once tried to arm wrestle an oak tree and got offended when it didn't flinch. They hand you a blunt training axe so dull it couldn't cut butter. You grind it against a stone until sparks fly. The stone cracks. Gore upgrades you the next day, handing you a heavier axe and a nod that says, "That'll do." You thank him by swinging mid-sentence and sending his drinking horn flying into the fire. He stares into the flames and mutters, "You'll make history." The other children train with poise and discipline. You train like a thunderstorm trying to learn ballet, loud, wild, and unforgettable. You scream at birds. You leap at hay bales like they've personally wronged you. You don't learn swordplay. You develop a spiritual bond with disarray. Wrestling becomes your second language. Your first match ends with you lifting a boy named Egel and planting him in a puddle so forcefully that he develops a stutter. You offer him friendship after. He politely declines and moves to another village. There is no syllabus for you, only folklore in progress. Gore refers to you as the project. The term sticks. He says he hasn't seen this much unrefined rage since the time he headbutted a monk during a raid and lost. The only structured lesson you enjoy is the battle chant. Not because of rhythm, but because it's finally socially acceptable to shout without someone telling you to quiet down. You don't master stance or timing. What you master is unpredictability, pure, unfiltered chaos. Seasoned warriors learn to step aside when they hear your battle cry. It isn't graceful, but it works. Your training is shaping something raw into something rare. You're not just a boy anymore. You're becoming a force of nature. Frenzy, fury, berserker in the making. By 12, your reputation has outgrown your body. 3 villages refer to you simply as the loud one who headbutts things. One farmer swears his scarecrow gave up and slumped over after you walked by. The time has come. You are to undergo your rite of passage, the bearskin ceremony. No one tells you what that means. No scroll, no speech. One dawn, Gore simply tosses you a bucket filled with goat's blood and mutters, "You'll need this." No one blinks. No one questions. The journey, the calling, the transformation, it's all begun. And the world will never forget the shape you take. You don't calm down. Not really. You just redirect the storm. When they bring you deep into the forest for the ceremony, your eyes are wide. Not with fear, but with an energy that borders on delirious. Around a crackling fire, 5 men wait in silence. Scarred, shirtless, muttering. Each one an echo of some ancient fury. One of them is all three. They nod in that distinctly Norse way, expressionless, but with a presence that rattles the spine. You stand still, heart pounding like a war drum. This is the moment. The first rite begins. They dip their fingers into thick goat blood and draw runes across your chest. The symbols could mean courage, power, protection, or perhaps just a warning. Approach at your own risk. You don't ask. You don't blink. You try not to sneeze. And then they place it on your shoulders, the bearskin. It drapes over you like a prophecy woven from fur and memory. Its scent is ancient, like rage soaked in rain. No one knows if the bear was felled in battle or keeled over from sheer exhaustion. Either way, it fits, almost too well. The fire spits sparks. The men begin to chant, not in words you recognize, but in sounds that reach deeper than language. Primal, rhythmic. You're handed a horn of something that stings the air and burns the throat. You drink it fast. A mistake. Your face tries to leave your skull. And now the dance. You don't glide. You convulse. You stomp like thunder. You wave your limbs like a storm chased by bees. You howl. You spin. You fall. You rise again. The ritual is called becoming the bear. No one tells you not to fall into the fire, which means technically you're allowed. You don't, but it's close. At the ceremony's end, someone speaks your new name. You don't catch it. Could be bear tongue. Could be wolf's shadow. Could be that one. It doesn't matter. You've crossed over. You are no longer simply wild. You are now wild with purpose. From this moment, your training shifts. Now comes the sacred preparation before the battle, rituals carved into the soul of the berserker. And at the heart of it all, mushrooms. Not the kind served with stew. These are the kind whispered about in old stories, the kind that bend time and awaken beasts. No explanation is offered. Just a fistful of fungi and the words, "Chew quick." You obey. They taste like rot, regret, and damp forest floor. Moments later, reality begins to slide. The fire flickers and then speaks. Someone burps nearby, and it echoes like a horn blown over a battlefield. You have entered the trance. They call it berserker frenzy. You call it brain lightning. You feel heat in your muscles, pressure behind your eyes. The ground tilts. The air buzzes. You grin like a wolf who's just remembered his teeth. A straw dummy is placed in front of you. You don't wait. You lunge. You bite its neck. The elders exchange glances and nod. It's working, but there are side effects. Time unravels. You're not sure if you've been yelling for minutes or moons. You punch a shadow. It ducks. You scream at the ground and accuse it of betrayal. You sprint, then stop midair, then fall into a barrel of fish. The fish survive. You reek of salt and confusion for a week. Still, they call it a success. Some berserkers fast. Some meditate. Some brood on old wounds until the rage spills over. But you bloom under hallucination like a thunderflower. The goal isn't just aggression. It's transcendence. To become something that isn't entirely human. Less man, more omen. The kind of being that doesn't simply charge into battle, it arrives like a warning. You are chaos with purpose now. Difficult to train, impossible to babysit. But ready. And then the moment comes. The one you've waited for. No more straw figures. No more polite practice bites. This is your first true clash. Your first true test. The frenzy will be real, the stakes higher. And for the first time, your mind goes quiet because everything in you says the same thing. Let it begin. On battle morning, you rise before the sun, grinning. Breakfast doesn't survive your excitement. You flatten it by accident. Someone hands you the ceremonial mushroom, and you accept it like a gift, like a key, like you're ready to unlock the part of you that even you haven't seen yet. You chew fast. The clouds are already listening. You don't flinch. You don't pause. You bounce like thunder in human skin. At this point, your stomach recognizes ritual mushrooms as a core food group, and your limbs are already twitching in anticipation. The pre-battle dance begins, but it's not a dance so much as a battle cry without a battlefield. You hop in place, your axe windmilling through the air, until someone calmly reminds you that teammates are not, in fact, targets. You grunt something like an apology and proceed to headbutt a helmet. It's taken as a sign of maturity. Then the enemy crests the ridge. The world starts to shrink. Vision narrows. Noise stretches. You're vaguely aware that someone's screaming. Might be you, might not. Doesn't matter. You grip your axe until the handle complains. Your eyes glaze slightly, not enough to scare everyone, but enough to earn a whisper from Gore. He's crossed the veil, and then you erupt. You don't run, you detonate. You don't swing, you whirl. Your body forgets logic and embraces instinct. You leap like a stag possessed, roar like the sky's falling, and move with the uncoordinated vengeance of a fire-drenched walrus, somehow effective and terrifying all at once. Pain is background music. An arrow grazes your side. You respond by biting the nearest tree. A spear thrusts toward your ribs. You duck, kick its owner's knee sideways, and keep moving like a storm on borrowed time. You tackle men like they're made of straw, and by the time you're finished, even you can't recall who they were. This is the infamous Berserker Gang, a state beyond self, beyond fear. A realm where the mind detaches and the body becomes pure will. Some call it sacred. Others label it madness. You just call it how Thursdays feel. You roar until your voice cracks. You swing until your arms forget they're made of flesh. Your comrades don't speak to you. They wouldn't dare. One gently taps you with a shield to say, "We're done." You respond by hurling a log at him. He nods, honored. When the dust settles, you're still standing, covered in scratches, sweat, blood. Some yours, some not, and fragments of someone's helmet. No one says a word. You wipe your face, blink twice, and mutter, "Good warm up." And just like that, you're no longer in training. You are now a berserker. And if you've noticed a theme by now, it's this: armor has no place in your story. While other warriors strap themselves into rings of mail and sculpted leather, you arrive in fur, spit, and pure conviction. If you're feeling ceremonial, maybe a wrist wrap for flair, but never for protection. Because armor is for those planning to be struck. Your plan is to frighten your enemies into fleeing before their swords even rise. If someone lands a blow, it means they got too close, and that mistake stays with you. Not in silence, but in every feast where you remind them who let that happen. Besides, armor limits movement, and berserking is 80% unrestrained fury, 10% poorly directed acrobatics, and 10% bush-flavored fire rolls. You can't do that while wrapped in iron. But the bearskin? That remains. It's more than costume. It's ritual. It's identity. It smells like bad luck and smoke. But some believe it absorbs enemy fear. Others say it deflects steel. Mostly, it soaks up rain and makes you resemble an angry druid's fever dream. The truth is, you're not meant to look human. You are myth in motion, a ghost from the sagas, stalking the shorelines. You build toughness where others wear plates. Your bruises form constellations. Your scars are chapters. And if the day calls for it, you tattoo a wolf on your chest using soot, a thorn, and enough poor judgment to impress Odin himself. Yes, it hurts. Arrows still sting. Blades still mark. But to a berserker, pain is just a useful reminder that you've yet to fall. You once took a spear to the leg and didn't notice until someone pointed out that you were leaking. You thanked them, then threw a rock at the spearman. Fair trade. Other warriors might laugh at your lack of gear, until they watch you dismantle 3 shielded men with nothing but a spoon and righteous screaming. Then they laugh from behind trees. Because armor is overrated. You've got rage, you've got ritual, and you've got zero fear of personal consequence. But here's the quiet danger they don't teach you in chance. When the trance takes hold, everyone begins to blur. Intentions crumble. Lines fade. You enter the fray thinking, "I will only strike enemies today." But then the chaos hits. The mushrooms bloom in your brain, and suddenly your own warband starts to look suspicious. Your first mistake is mild, a misdirected axe high five that results in a shield brother getting headbutt. He accepts this with a grunt and a bleeding smile. "All part of it," he says while stuffing moss into his wound. But it doesn't end there. On your third raid, you confuse a comrade's beard for a snake and attempt to rip it off. He forgives you, mostly. Later, in the frenzy of melee, someone shouts your name. You turn. You launch your helmet. It was your cousin. He was bringing stew. Such is the risk of becoming the storm. Because when you unleash the beast within, the world stops being divided into friend and foe, and starts looking like everything was made to be broken. You don't hold grudges, and thankfully, neither does your warband, because being a berserker is a little like being a thunderstorm with fur, loud, messy, full of energy, and totally unaware of how much you're wrecking while you're in motion. You even manage an apology once during a frenzy, slamming into a warrior's back and offering a roar mixed with a thumbs up. From the ground, he salutes you with quiet resignation. Eventually, your fellow warriors start adapting around your chaos like villagers learning to live with an unpredictable volcano. Some tie red sashes around their waists to remind you they're not the enemy. You forget. Others simply maintain a healthy 10-foot radius at all times and let you charge ahead, clearing the path like a living battering ram. One particularly clever comrade shouts your name in the middle of battle just to confuse you. It works. You chase a tree for half an hour before realizing it never once fought back. Someone half jokes about putting a bell around your neck. They're ignored. You're not livestock. You're just emotionally kinetic. A new routine forms. If you sprint in the wrong direction, they wait. If you start screaming at an inanimate object like a tent or a barrel, they quietly set it on fire later so you think you won. And despite the ankle bites, unplanned tackles, and mid-frenzy growls aimed at allies, no one wants to go to war without you. Because when you're there, everything changes. You turn panic into power. You step onto a field, and the enemy feels something shift. Not because of your size or your stance. You're usually barefoot, shirtless, and dripping something unpleasant. But it's the eyes. The expression that says, "I don't know you, but I'm going to shout at you anyway." That's your true weapon. Fear. Pure psychological unease, wrapped in a cloak that smells like regret. Your name spreads, not as a song of honor, but as a warning wrapped in myth. Some say you twitched through an entire council meeting. Others claim you bit a shield in half. You don't confirm or deny. In your line of work, legends are more useful than facts. Stories of you race ahead before your feet even reach the gates. In nearby villages, goats are hidden, fences are reinforced, and adults shush children at night with your name. Not to scare them, but because they're still a little scared themselves. Enemies hesitate when they see you, not because of armor, you never wear any, but because of that twitch in your shoulder and the wild look that suggests you're deciding whether to scream or sing. You bring confusion, and confusion is terror's best friend. While others have polished blades and techniques drilled into them, you have unpredictability and an alarming fondness for biting. But reputation carries weight, and not just the celebratory kind. After every fight, there's cleanup. You usually regain awareness while cradling a tree branch you've named Victory, wearing a stranger's blood like war paint, and muttering things at passing birds. A priest mumbles a prayer. You grunt in response. He backs away. 3 longships have fallen to your post-battle enthusiasm. Once just by walking on them. Another time you tried to wrestle a statue. The statue technically won, but not without emotional damage. Your warband appoints a handler, a man whose only job is to guide you away from fragile things and quietly remind you that campfires and tents are not enemies. You nod, then punch the ground. It's a start, and still the songs grow louder. Skalds sing tales of you in keys that suggest confusion and awe. You're called things like the roaring flame of Hildheim or the hammer that forgets itself. You don't even remember Hildheim, but assume you did something legendary and possibly illegal. There, you're no longer a warrior. You're a rumor that walks. But life isn't all frenzy and headbutts. Even storms have strange moments of calm. You never expected to feel it. Berserkers aren't exactly known for their emotional depth. Feelings are slippery, hard to throw an axe at, impossible to wrestle. Yet, in the odd lull between raids, it happens. She's the blacksmith's daughter. Strong hands, sharpened eyes. She doesn't flinch when you pass, though she does keep tongs nearby. She's used them as weapons before, and you find that oddly charming. You try to impress her in the only way you know, by accidentally shattering her father's anvil with a training log. She storms outside, face red, voice raised, demanding an explanation. You don't hesitate. You offer, with complete sincerity, to fight the anvil's ghost. She pauses, then laughs, then throws a horseshoe at your head. You fall in love instantly. Courtship is unconventional. You flex. You lift a goat. You throw a rock impressively far. She watches, unimpressed, and continues hammering iron like your presence is just background noise. Eventually, she agrees to walk with you, not out of affection, yet, but because she's figured out it's safer to keep an eye on you than leave you alone near sharp things. You walk beside her. Conversation comes slow, but for once you're not charging. You're not roaring. You're simply there, half wild, half curious, wondering if perhaps there's more to life than war cries and mushroom visions. It's awkward. It's messy. But maybe, just maybe, it's the beginning of something softer. You're not skilled in the art of flirting. Your love language is carrying heavy objects and yelling at clouds. So, naturally, when the blacksmith's daughter agrees to walk with you, you bring a log. You carry it the entire time, hoping it says what words cannot. She doesn't ask about it. That's when you know, this one might just understand your strange kind of affection. Your fellow berserkers are baffled. Isn't love a distraction? One asks, sharpening a blade. You think for a moment, then explain. She's the reason you haven't tried to tackle a cooking tent in over a week. That stuns them into silence. Sounds like discipline, one mutters. You say nothing. You're too busy carving her name into your chest with a sharp stick. Eventually, she gives you a necklace. Simple, unpolished, slightly sharp, just like you. You never take it off, especially in battle. When asked why, you say, "It protects me." It's equal parts sweet and mildly concerning. You don't fully understand love, but you understand loyalty. She patches your gear. You bring her curious bones from the forest. It works. There are disagreements. You once attempted a moonlight serenade by howling at the sky. She asked you to stop. You howled louder. You slept outside for 3 nights. Still, she stays. And in your world, that's more romantic than poetry. Because even chaos enjoys a spark of calm. And you, in your storm-hearted way, are falling in love. Feasting follows every battle. It's the Norseman's reward for not dying: food, drink, song, and occasionally injury. For most warriors, it's a chance to unwind. For you, it's a logistical challenge. You often arrive last, mostly because it takes time to scrape off the battle. You usually show up shirtless, bleeding, barefoot, and proudly dragging something no one wants to eat. Once it was a squirrel. It became famous in song. Feasts begin with a toast. You interpret that as a call to consume everything with a liquid property. Mead, ale, and something that smells like regret in a barrel. You once drank from a lamp by accident. You then lit a torch with your breath. The village children still tell stories about that night. Then the food arrives. Bread, meat, pickled things with no names. You approach the table like it owes you an apology. You don't chew. You conquer. You once consumed 5 eggs in 60 seconds and declared vengeance upon a cabbage. Your digestive system, however, has limits. This leads to the Great Hall Incident. A potent mix of beans, song, and an ill-timed battle chant that ends in an echo so powerful. A man quietly sobbed into his porridge. Of course, feasting also means fighting. It's tradition. Sleep-deprived warriors, too much mead, and no immediate enemies makes for volatile conditions. You once misheard "pass the boar" as "you smell like boar," and started a bench-breaking rampage. Still, you're always forgiven. Because while others offer tales, you offer entertainment. Your flatulence once scared off a wolf. That counts as defense. By the end of every feast, you're curled under a table, cuddling a ham bone and humming a tune from battle. Berserkers don't just rage. They revel like the world is ending and they're hosting the send-off. But not all your tales are glorious. Every berserker has one story they don't retell. Yours is simply known as the sheep incident. It began like any raid should. A longship, cold air, and the anticipation of chaos. Your blood was hot, the mushrooms had kicked in, and you were wearing your bearskin backwards for intimidation. No one questioned it. No one wanted to be the first to die. The target was a modest coastal village, a place to gather silver, break some fences, howl at rooftops. But when you landed, the place was eerily silent. No shouts, no swords, just sheep, dozens of them. Where warriors might hesitate, you charged. You dove into the flock, convinced the woolly masses were hiding something. One sheep stood its ground. You took this as surrender and named it your first conquest of the day. Others followed, not out of strategy, but out of sheer confusion. You began destroying structures with righteous enthusiasm. One, sadly, was a chicken coop. You were met by 5 hens and a rooster named Olaf. They attacked. You retaliated by headbutting the sky. Still debated who won that fight. You stumbled into what seemed a sacred building, toppling an altar. It was a kitchen. You ate bread, and also, by mistake, a candle. You realized the error when your throat caught fire. You growled. The candle reconsidered its life choices. By the time the farmer arrived, an elderly man with a rake and mild irritation, you were deep into berserk mode. You screamed. He squinted. You charged. He hurled a turnip at your head. It was a direct hit. You retreated. The raid was over. Back at camp, no one said much. One warrior, still holding a confused goat, whispered, "We took a pasture." And you, mighty berserker, chaos incarnate, sat down next to him, nodded solemnly, and muttered, "Victory." You nod, slow and deliberate. Another warrior chimes in, "We burned a cabbage patch too." You glance sideways and reply, "It looked aggressive." The Scalds try to reshape the whole incident into a saga of valor. They fail. You go down in the lore as the berserker who defeated a flock but was bested by produce. You try to defend your honor. The sheep had suspicious eyes. You mutter. The others nod solemnly. They've heard weirder. And yet, somehow, your legend keeps expanding. Because with berserkers, it's not always about glory. Sometimes it's about volume. You're older now. Not exactly wise, but seasoned. Your knees now creak like old doors when you crouch, and people no longer flinch when you lift your axe. They've realized it takes you a minute to get the swing going. Your beard has started to catch silver in the firelight. Scars, once trophies, now serve as weather forecasts. You've begun telling tales to anyone nearby. Children, travelers, livestock. Once, you spoke to a barrel for 3 hours before realizing it wasn't listening. It didn't matter. It was still a good story. You've managed something few in your path ever achieve: survival. Many berserkers blaze hot and vanish young. Too much fury, too many visions, and not enough caution. But you've endured not through strategy, but unpredictability. Even the gods, it said, couldn't guess your next move. Your name gets passed around with respect, or at least caution. People claim you're part bear, part wolf, and part madness. The math never adds up. No one minds. You've even taken on apprentices. You taught one to roar from his belly. Another how to tackle a tree and apologize later. A third learned to scream, "I am the wind," mid-charge. He now bakes bread but still yells it when kneading dough. Legacy in its own way. Raiding days are mostly behind you now. Your last attempt ended with you wedged in a doorway, blaming architecture. Instead, you guard the village, grumbling like a stone with opinions. Sometimes someone brings you a mushroom. You sniff and mutter, "Not today, hallucinations." The blacksmith's daughter still stands beside you. She rolls her eyes when you growl at thunder. You ignore her when she nags you to wash your cloak. That's love, the ancient Viking kind. Now, when children play berserker, they shout your name while swinging sticks and biting the air. Elders sigh, "You remind me of him." Every time a bench is kicked over, your story isn't just about rage anymore. It's about staying, about laughter, about not knowing which fork is for stew and using your hands anyway. You won't live forever. Not even you, the storm that howled through northern winds and mushrooms. One winter, your bones begin complaining louder than usual. You speak in grunts more than words. The hearth becomes your battlefield. You sit beside it, muttering to yourself, polishing your old axe with a tuft of beard you accidentally sneezed off. Death doesn't scare you. You've shouted at it too many times to be afraid. You once tried to wrestle a thunderstorm just to make Valhalla jealous. If anything, you're annoyed it's taking so long. You start muttering things like, "Any day now," followed by dramatic coughs and chewing pebbles for flair. And when it finally arrives, it's not in a blaze of battle, but beneath the open stars, wrapped in your ancient bearskin that still smells like smoke, sweat, and one too many goats. You exhale once, long and slow, and whisper your final words. Tell Valhalla to reinforce the chairs. They say the skies trembled that night, that somewhere, far off, a wolf howled without knowing why. They say someone found a shield with your parting thoughts carved into the grain. I regret nothing, except that turnip. Your funeral, naturally, is chaos. The villagers attempt a noble send-off, but it derails almost instantly. Someone starts a fight because you once allegedly punched a cloud. A goat escapes. The pyre ignites too soon. You would have loved it. Your war band drinks too much, sings off-key, and throws your helmet into the fjord. It sinks immediately, just like you did that one time you challenged a barrel to a swim. Children reenact your life with wild grunts and improvised battle cries. One bites a log. Everyone agrees your legacy is intact. The skalds begin their work. None of the facts are accurate. In their ballads, you defeat 20 men in a single swing and romance a spirit of the forest. No one bothers correcting them. Stories, after all, aren't meant to be exact, they're meant to echo. And yours? Yours echoes loudest. Not because you were flawless, but because you were real. Because you were a walking storm in human form. Equal parts destruction and laughter, madness and heart. Long after your fire fades, the tavern walls still shake from your name. And somewhere, in the corner of memory and myth, a sheep still runs. You probably picture them caked in mud, axes dripping, beards tangled with old fish, wild warriors who smelled like smoke and thunder. But here's the twist. Behind that brutal legend, you'd find a Viking carefully combing his hair by firelight, inspecting his beard with something close to artistic pride. Because in truth, you were part of a culture that was strikingly obsessed with looking sharp. You weren't just feared on the battlefield, you were noticed, admired, sometimes envied. Because while you could split a shield with your bare hands, you also owned a comb carved from polished antler, decorated like a treasured heirloom. Archaeologists haven't just dug up swords and war spoils from Norse graves. They've uncovered razors, tweezers, ear picks, and grooming kits, some stored as carefully as weapons. These weren't throwaway tools. They were status pieces, symbols of self-respect. Viking Gucci, if you will. And it wasn't vanity. It was honor. Because in the Norse world, how you looked said everything about who you were. A clean face, a well-kept beard, a tunic free from grime. This wasn't a luxury. It was a statement. I matter. I am worth watching. When you walked into a thing, the Viking version of a public assembly, you didn't arrive looking like you wrestled a goat through a bog. You arrived composed, sharpened, and clean. That was your armor too. The line between warrior and showman was blurry. Beards were oiled and braided. Hair was styled with flair. Colors were chosen to reflect status or personality. Even those of lower rank had access to grooming tools because Viking society, unlike many others in medieval Europe, didn't romanticize dirt. Cleanliness wasn't penance, it was attractive, even sensual. You didn't just get ready for battle. You got ready for attention. Viking women were no different. Grooming wasn't a male pastime, it was a cultural cornerstone. Oils for the hair, salves for the skin, even personal grooming kits passed from generation to generation. First impressions mattered, especially in a society where alliances were forged in feasting halls, and love often began across a shared steam bath. Bathing wasn't an afterthought. It was an institution. In fact, the Norse calendar had an entire day dedicated to it. Laugardagr, literally, washing day, which would evolve, in time, into what we now call Saturday. That day when you relax and finally take that long shower, You're living Viking tradition whether you know it or not. And Viking bathing wasn't just about scrubbing off sweat or ship grime. It was a social ritual. Tubs were filled with fire-warmed water. Families gathered. Neighbors chatted. Bathhouses buzzed with conversation, laughter, and maybe the occasional courtship. If you were wealthy, you had your own tub. If you weren't, a nearby stream did the trick. Either way, you were getting clean. No excuses. They even had soap. Made from ash and animal fat, it was rough, pungent, and effective enough to strip grime and color from anything, including hair, which is exactly what many Viking men wanted. Blonde beards, once thought to be solely genetic, were often created by this very process. In a sense, ancient Norsemen were lightening their hair long before punk rock made it a rebellious statement. And here's where things get entertaining. Their enemies hated this. Monks and scribes across Anglo-Saxon England wrote in disbelief at how presentable their invaders were. These Norsemen had the nerve to wash daily, comb their hair, and, heaven forbid, change their clothes. One chronicler even blamed Viking hygiene for why so many English women found them irresistible. Imagine losing battles and girlfriends over a man with cleaner fingernails. Clean wasn't just sexy, it was strategy. Because when you sailed into foreign lands, you didn't just bring axes. You brought confidence. You showed up polished, fragrant by Viking standards, and unbothered by the idea of looking like a wild animal. In a world that still debated whether water was dangerous or holy, you'd already made your decision. Water was power. Now let's talk clothes. If your mind goes straight to ragged pelts held together by luck and fish guts, let's correct that. Viking fashion was layered, colorful, and thoughtful. A man's basic outfit might include a woolen or linen tunic, trousers or leggings, and a belt that wasn't just functional, it was expressive. Patterns were embroidered, colors were chosen, cloaks were lined with fur and fastened with ornate brooches. And yes, lots of layers. You dressed not just for the cold, but for the eyes around you. Drab beige was a cry for help. If you walked into a hall wearing that, someone might hand you a comb and ask gently if you needed to talk. You weren't just a warrior. You were a walking display of pride, strength, and presence. You didn't hide your brightness under grime. You polished it until it gleamed through the snow and soot. Even your weapons were decorative. Even your beard had choreography. So the next time you imagine a Viking, don't just see a shadow in the fog wielding an axe. Picture someone who knew the value of presence, who braided his hair with care, who spent as much time tending to his comb as he did to his blade. You weren't just built for battle. You were styled for legend. You fasten your belt, not just to keep your trousers in place, but to make a statement. In the Viking world, belts were more than fabric and function. A finely crafted buckle could speak louder than a sword, could say, "I have power, I matter, and yes, I sparkle." Cloaks followed suit, worn not just for warmth, but for flair. Fastened with brooches shaped like wolves, ravens, or twisting serpents from Norse legend, they became part of a warrior's identity. Each one was a woven signature, stitched with pride and symbolism. And if you thought Viking women were wrapped in scraps and shadows, think again. Their style was layered, intentional, and full of subtle power. They wore long underdresses paired with shorter overdresses, fastened at the shoulders by two oval brooches. Between those brooches hung strands of beads, keys, charms, sometimes even tiny tools. These weren't just trinkets. They whispered stories. They said, "I run this household," or "This charm came from a trade route you've never heard of." Accessories weren't vanity, they were communication. And color? The Norse loved it. Yellows from birch leaves, reds from madder root, deep blues from woad. The wealthier you were, the deeper your hues. But even a modest household might have a dash of red on a tunic or blue embroidery on a sleeve, visual proof of effort, trade, or a skilled hand at the loom. Color was currency in a world painted with stone and sky. Feet, too, had their say. Most Vikings wore leather shoes or boots tied with toggles or laces, practical for chasing down a sheep or walking miles over rugged ground. But if you had wealth to spare, you might decorate them, or have them made specially to match your social footprint. Fashion met function even in the mud. Then came the crown of all Viking pride, the hair. Hair wasn't just something that grew. It was a performance, a signature, a shield of beauty. Beards were sculpted with purpose. Long and braided, forked or squared, each one said something about the man who wore it. Beard oil, likely mixed from animal fat and herbs, kept it shining and soft. Because even if you just come off a week-long raid, your beard didn't need to know that. A scraggly beard? That was a personal failing, an insult to the gods, one that might cost you an invitation to the feast. But Viking women were just as expressive. Their hair was usually worn long, parted down the middle, and arranged in complex styles. Braids, coils, and ribbons were the tools of the well-groomed. For festivals, they'd add beads or metal accents, not just for flair, but as unspoken signals. A hairstyle could hint at status, kinship, or even availability. In Viking culture, your hair might flirt before your lips did. Braiding was a shared tradition. Men and women alike twisted strands into orderly designs, some practical, others theatrical. Braids kept hair controlled on ships, farms, and fields, but they also dazzled when interlaced with colored threads or leather cords. Some warriors even shaved parts of their heads, leaving dramatic braids or locks that trailed down their backs. Tribal identity, personal taste, either way, it gave enemies something to remember, assuming they lived. And tools? They had them. Combs made of bone, razors, tweezers, often carried in leather pouches or hung from belts. Some even had polished metal mirrors, not for vanity, but for presence. Because when you stepped into a hall or battle, you wanted to know your braids still roared louder than your reputation. Hair wasn't an afterthought. It was spiritual armor. It held identity, protected memory, and echoed pride. Whether you swung a hammer or a sword, your hair told a tale before you spoke. And jewelry? Oh, they didn't just wear it, they lived in it. A well-dressed Viking wouldn't leave home without some shimmer. Whether headed for battle or a feast, your look wasn't complete without metal. Viking women wore brooches not only to fasten their clothes but to dazzle. Some were cast in bronze or silver, carved with knotwork, serpents, or mythical beasts. Between the brooches, strands of beads told stories of travels, trades, and talents. Think of them as wearable biographies. For men, the statement came in the form of arm rings and neck torques. Thick bands of twisted metal, silver, bronze, or even gold, announced status, wealth, or allegiance. These pieces weren't just for show. They could be cut and traded as currency in times of need. Jewelry was economy, reputation, and identity braided into a single gleaming loop. And when you wore these things, it wasn't subtle. You didn't hide them under layers. You let them catch the firelight. You let the clang of your beads speak before you even entered the room. Because Vikings didn't just conquer with blades. They did it with presence, with color, with confidence. They knew that sometimes the best way to win was to look like you'd already won. So next time you imagine a Viking, don't stop at the helmet and sword. Picture the red of his tunic, the gleam of her brooches, the shine of oiled hair catching the sunlight after a long voyage. Picture the swagger of someone who knew their comb mattered as much as their axe. Because yes, you were rugged, but never plain. You were fierce, but always intentional. You didn't just wear your culture. You wore it proudly, boldly, and beautifully. On your chest, on your belt, in your braids. And that was the Viking way. You might think of jewelry as decoration, a finishing touch. But in your world, it was also currency, commitment, and communication, all wrapped around your wrist. A chieftain could reward loyalty with a silver arm ring, and if the moment demanded, it could be clipped and weighed like coin. Viking bling wasn't just for flash. It doubled as savings. Rings were everywhere, on fingers, on toes, on the tips of stories passed down around firelight. Some bore runic inscriptions for protection or luck, others just for style. And yes, wedding rings existed, but in true Norse fashion, they weren't dainty or whispered. They were bold, symbolic, and sometimes exchanged alongside brooches or pins to prove you didn't just marry into the family. You earned your place in it. And then there were the pendants. Thor's hammer Mjolnir hung around countless necks, not just as a religious emblem, but as a kind of spiritual shield. It was as much a good luck charm as it was a declaration. I stand with the old gods. As Christianity crept in, crosses appeared too. But the Vikings weren't purists. Some wore both, hedging their spiritual bets in case one god happened to be napping. Now let's talk grooming. You may think skincare and cosmetics belong to distant queens or desert traders, but you'd be wrong. In truth, Viking self-care stretched far beyond soap and beards. These warriors had routines. They had rituals. And yes, they had their own kind of makeup. Arabic travelers who encountered Norsemen, like the famed Ahmad ibn Fadlan, wrote of men darkening their eyes with kohl. It wasn't vanity. It was function. That pigment cut the glare of snow and sunlight, working like primitive eye black. Of course, the fact that it made you look like a smoldering demigod, that was just a bonus. Practical and mesmerizing. The Viking way. There may not have been bathhouses stocked with lotions and powders, but that didn't mean skincare was ignored. Animal fats blended with herbs created balms to soothe windburn and lock in warmth. Birch tar, usually a sealant or antiseptic, sometimes made its way onto skin to scare off bugs or calm irritation. You didn't need fancy scents when you had thyme or mint tossed into your bathwater or tucked into your cloak for freshness and protection. Wealthier folk even wore sachets, little pouches of fragrant leaves hidden in their clothes, softening their scent and warding off pests. Think of it as a Viking dryer sheet. And women, they weren't just washing, they were radiating. Hair oils, skin salves, subtle perfumes made from herbs or flowers. A healthy glow wasn't vanity. It was proof of discipline, of pride in one's home and body. Beauty was a reflection of honor. Even your teeth had flair. Viking remains show surprisingly strong dental health, with some individuals filing decorative grooves into their teeth, sometimes filled with pigment or resin. Was it status? Identity? Early mouth tattoos? We don't know for sure. But it was deliberate, and it tells us something vital. The Norse weren't just surviving, they were styling. Now imagine the children, not barefoot wildlings tangled in wool, but tiny reflections of the adult world, clean, composed, and very much a part of the social picture. Viking children were dressed with intention. Boys were tunics, girls were long dresses, often layered with cloaks or aprons depending on the season. Their clothes, made from linen, wool, or soft leathers, weren't decorative toys. They were functional gear for chasing goats, helping in chores, or escaping unexpected raiders. Footwear was real, sturdy, and replaceable, made for movement and weather. And just like the adults, color mattered. Even modest homes might dress their children in red trim, a bit of blue stitching, or a splash of gold thread for special occasions. Embroidery wasn't a luxury. It was a language. If your child was being introduced at a gathering, a thing, or even a feast, you didn't send them looking like they lost a fight with a haystack. You braided their hair. You brushed their sleeves. You prayed they didn't immediately fall face first into a puddle. Because first impressions mattered, even for the youngest among you. So no, Vikings weren't the walking storm clouds of grit and grease the stories sometimes make them out to be. They were vivid, purposeful, proud of their reflection. They wielded axes with one hand and combs with the other. They understood that looking powerful was sometimes just as important as being powerful. Your world was full of sharp edges, but not just in weapons. In craftsmanship, in grooming, in the subtle cut of a dyed cloak, or the shape of a runic ring. You didn't just raid, you radiated. From the bone pins in your braids to the shimmer of your beard oil in sunlight, you carried your culture on your skin. And that story, the one written in silver and scent, in color and confidence, that one still gleams. You weren't just taught how to stand tall, you were taught how to stay clean. From the moment you could hold a comb, you were expected to act like a Viking. Even as a child, you wore your culture. Girls had their hair carefully braided, sometimes woven with tiny beads that shimmered in the morning light. Boys had trimmed styles, perhaps not yet full warriors, but their hair already whispered of the men they would become. Hygiene was more than habit. It was honor. Bath day wasn't a suggestion, it was a ritual. You didn't skip it unless you were planning to sit alone at the feast or be publicly wrinkled with shame. Families bathed together. And your first comb? It wasn't just practical, it was a promise. A small, carved bone tool passed down like a blade. It said, "Someday you'll keep your beard as your father did. Someday your reflection will matter." Children were reflections of their household's values. Discipline, pride, and dignity weren't grown into later. They were braided into you from the start. Because even at 6, you were already part of the saga. And you were expected to look the part. It's easy to be clean when there's a hearth nearby and a warm tub waiting. But Vikings didn't just bathe at home. They carried their cleanliness across oceans. Whether you were storming a monastery or sleeping under stars, your grooming tools traveled with you. Graves of warriors have revealed combs, razors, tweezers, and even ear-picks tucked beside swords. These weren't souvenirs. They were survival tools, just as vital as a shield, because tangled hair could tangle your thoughts. A greasy beard could get in the way of a clean strike. A matted tunic could slow your draw. Even your helmet fit better on a shaved head. And no one, absolutely no one, wanted lice on a 3-week voyage. Your razor was curved, sharpened with care, built to glide over jawlines while you watched your reflection ripple in a stream. You carried sewing needles and wax thread in your pouch, because torn seams snagged during battle, and wet wool left unattended could chill you to the bone. You didn't just swing weapons. You stitched, patched, and folded. A warrior with calloused hands who could also mend a cloak. Water sources during campaigns weren't chosen for convenience alone. Rivers and springs were lifelines. For drinking, yes, but also for rinsing the grime of travel from your skin. If no stream was nearby, pots were warmed, makeshift tubs formed, and you made do. Maybe the water was cold. Maybe the soap was gritty. But you washed. Always. Even in the sagas, just before the swords fly, you'll read of heroes washing their hands and combing their hair. That wasn't poetic license. That was culture. Before battle, you honored yourself. You didn't just look ready, even if you were about to steal a chalice, your nails were clean. Even if your blade was still dripping, your beard was oiled. If your mind has painted the Norse as unwashed beasts, mud-covered, meat-sweating, flea-bitten caricatures, you're not alone. But that image, it was crafted by those who feared you and envied you, because if a tanned, towering seafarer raided your shores smelling faintly of mint and thyme, you'd smear his name too. The truth? You were among the cleanest and best-groomed people in early medieval Europe. While other societies debated whether water was a moral risk or a medical hazard, you scrubbed yourselves weekly. Bathing wasn't shameful. It was sacred. Where some monks shunned cleanliness in pursuit of piety, you embraced it as a path to respect. You changed shirts. You combed hair. You bathed every laugerdagger washing day. And that made you dangerous. Christian chroniclers wrote about your hygiene with a mix of bitterness and disbelief. They bathe too much. They always smell good. They steal our women. One monk even grumbled that Norsemen were too successful because they changed clothes and bathed too often. Translation: they were attractive, and we hate that. Even today, the stories rarely get it right. Modern portrayals still lean into grit and grime. But in truth, a Viking who showed up to a feast looking like he'd fought a pig on the way wouldn't be welcomed. He'd be laughed out. Status depended on presence. Reputation clung not only to your name, but to your collar. Of course, not every Viking looked like a walking god. Life was brutal. Storms tore through ships. Hunger gnawed at borders. But the effort, the intention, it was always there. You kept a blade at your side and a comb in your belt. You stitched your shirt while sharpening your axe. You fought hard but looked harder, because to be Viking was not only to survive. It was to stand tall, clean, prepared, and proud. Whether sailing to distant lands or sitting beside the hearth, your reflection mattered. And that was part of the legend too. You lived in a world where even the afterlife expected you to be presentable. Cleanliness wasn't a vanity, it was a vow. A warrior's strength was measured not just in the swing of his sword, but in the polish of his beard, the trim of his nails. A woman's hair and dress didn't just reflect her style, they reflected the pride and standing of her entire household. Even in burial, Vikings were often laid to rest with combs, razors, and grooming tools beside them. Because wherever you were headed, Valhalla or beyond, you didn't arrive disheveled. You arrived prepared. And now, as we drift south from those icy fjords into the sun-bleached marble of ancient Greece, the story shifts. You step into Sparta, where the rules that governed most of the ancient world didn't quite apply. In Athens, a proper woman was invisible, hushed, and hidden behind the walls of her husband's home. But in Sparta, she was a landowner, a runner, a speaker, a force. Spartan women didn't shrink from the agora. They walked through it with their heads high and shoulders back. They weren't just permitted to speak, they were expected to. From the moment a Spartan girl entered the world, she was raised with a purpose, not to serve a man, but to serve the state by becoming strong, sharp, and unyielding. Physical training was part of her education. Wrestling, running, javelin throwing, it wasn't play. It was preparation. The belief was simple. Strong mothers birthed strong soldiers, and Sparta needed soldiers like crops need rain. Unlike the sheltered daughters of Athens, Spartan girls learned to read, write, and, perhaps most dangerously, speak their minds. Their wit was legendary, their words sometimes sharper than a blade. One mother, sending her son off to battle, handed him his shield and said, "Come back with it or on it." That wasn't metaphor. That was Spartan standard. And while most women in the ancient world were barred from owning land, Spartan women broke that mold. They could inherit. They could buy. By some accounts, they controlled up to a third of all property in Sparta. Because when the men were off dying in battle, it was the women who kept the economy breathing. They ran estates, managed wealth, and made decisions without waiting for male permission. Influence wasn't enough, they held real power. Marriage, too, was far from the romanticized unions of later legends. Spartan weddings were part ceremony, part theater, and entirely unique. They began not with flowers and soft songs, but with a staged abduction. Yes, to be married in Sparta, a woman was stolen by her groom. But don't misunderstand, it wasn't a crime. It was a rite of passage, steeped in custom and symbolic meaning. Here's how it unfolded. Once an agreement was reached between families, often laced with political undertones, the groom and his friends would sneak into the bride's household and whisk her away. She would be taken to a private location, where an older woman shaved her head, dressed her in a man's cloak and sandals, and laid her on a straw mat. The reason for this transformation, still debated by scholars. Perhaps it symbolized the death of childhood and the rebirth into Spartan womanhood. Perhaps it mirrored the masculine ideals prized by Spartan society. Or perhaps it was a ritual that blurred the line between gender roles, because in Sparta, even femininity had muscle. After the ritual, the groom didn't stay. Not yet. He returned to his barracks. By day, he lived among his comrades, trained, and marched like every other Spartan soldier. But by night, he would sneak away to visit his new bride, in secrecy. These rendezvous might continue for months, even a year or more. A strange blend of duty and desire. A dance between public service and private intimacy. They were married, yes, but they didn't move in together. That would come much later. Spartan men weren't allowed to live with their wives until they reached the age of 30. And until then, their loyalty belonged first to Sparta, second to love. Marriage wasn't about romance. It was about responsibility. The union wasn't just for pleasure. It was for the production of the next generation of warriors. So, you were abducted under custom. Your hair was shorn. You lay cloaked in masculinity. And when the ceremony ended, you returned to your parents' home. Not to play bride, but to wait. Because in Sparta, the battlefield always came before the bedroom. Spartan boys, too, didn't get the luxury of home life. At 7, they were taken from their families and enrolled in the agoge, the harsh state-run training system designed to turn children into warriors. Discipline, pain, resilience. These were the gifts Sparta gave its sons. But it also gave its daughters something rare: voice, strength, and standing. You didn't just marry into society, you helped build it. And so, as you lie here tonight, letting the weight of centuries wrap around your thoughts like a warm cloak. Remember this. In every shadowed corner of history, there are women who spoke when the world demanded silence. There are warriors who polished their blades and their beards. And there are stories like this one that gleam not just with steel but with pride. You are walking through them now, step by step, into sleep. You didn't marry a Spartan, you joined a military schedule. Even after the wedding vows were whispered, the reality was less about candlelight and more about curfews. You didn't live together, not really. The husband stayed in the barracks, bound by brotherhood and duty, sharing meals and sleeping quarters with fellow soldiers in tightly knit mess groups known as Sisisha. Nights with your spouse? Those were quiet, stolen visits under cover of darkness, followed by a swift return before dawn. Years could pass like this, not out of cruelty, but to keep loyalty sharpened like a spear. Intimacy wasn't forbidden, it was carefully measured, rationed so that no comfort could dull a warrior's edge. Domestic life? A distant second to Spartan discipline. And while the men vanished into regiments, the women held the city in place. But don't imagine sorrowful wives weeping by a hearth. In Sparta, women didn't wait. They ruled. They managed the land, oversaw the labor of helots, and directed household economies with the authority of seasoned generals. With husbands often away and dying young, women became both guardians of the home and drivers of its prosperity. Some became so influential they shaped the city's wealth and politics more than any speech ever could. This wasn't the exception. It was the norm. Producing children wasn't simply a personal joy, it was a patriotic act. Sparta needed strength, not sentimentality. And if one man lacked the necessary physical vigor to father future soldiers, another might be welcome to do so, not in secrecy, but with the state's full blessing. The goal was simple and cold. Create the next generation of elite warriors, not out of love, but out of national necessity. Motherhood in Sparta wasn't a quiet, cradle-rocking affair. It was a declaration, campaign. You didn't earn honor through embroidery or sweetness. You earned it by birthing strength. From girlhood, Spartan daughters were prepared for this role. They weren't wrapped in silks, they were thrown into sports. Wrestling, racing, discus throwing, each activity served a greater purpose. Build a body capable of enduring childbirth and producing sons who could stand through war. Weakness had no place in this equation. When a Spartan woman gave birth, her baby wasn't greeted with lullabies. The child was examined by the state. If the infant looked frail or malformed, it might be left at the base of Mount Taygetus, exposed to the wind and sun. The decision wasn't personal, it was systemic. Only the strong would be nurtured. Only the promising would be trained. As chilling as this may sound, it was seen as mercy through the lens of Spartan survival. Harsh, yes, but to them necessary. Yet for those mothers whose children survived, honor flowed like wine. A woman who lost sons in battle might be awarded public recognition. Not sorrow, not sympathy, but reverence. She had done her duty. Her grief was transformed into glory. And if a son returned from battle without his shield, meaning he dropped it in retreat, his mother would be the first to shame him. Return with it or on it, she might say, her voice steady with ancestral pride. Cowardice wasn't punished by courts. It was crushed under the weight of a mother's disappointment. Mothers weren't just bearers of warriors, they were molders of them. Until boys reached the age of 7 and entered the grueling state-run ecloge, their mothers were their first instructors in pride, fortitude, and self-control. Girls, meanwhile, remained at home, trained in both strength and wit, heirs to the Spartan matriarchs who spoke with clarity and walked with command. Lineage mattered. Nobility shaped destiny. A girl born to an elite warrior bloodline didn't just inherit wealth. She inherited expectation. And in a place where daughters could eventually control land, their names held weight long before marriage. In fact, property was more than privilege. It was power. While most ancient women were treated as dependents or decorations, Spartan women became some of the most influential landholders in the classical world. Some records suggest they controlled nearly 1/3 of all Spartan land, a staggering contrast to the rest of Greece. But this wasn't a loophole. This was law. women inherited from both their fathers and their husbands. And when wars claimed so many Spartan men early in life, widows were not stripped of assets. They were empowered by them. They managed estates. They commanded labor forces. They brokered trades and preserved legacies. They didn't just own wealth. They wielded it, and that made them formidable. Spartan women were state rulers, civic participants, mothers of warriors, and the unshakable spine of a militarized empire. They didn't just walk through history, they helped carry it. So, as you drift into sleep, wrap yourself in that truth. Strength doesn't always roar on the battlefield. Sometimes, it hums in the voice of a mother sending her son to war. Sometimes, it whispers in the footsteps of a woman walking alone through her land, unafraid, unapologetic, and undeniably powerful. In Sparta, the sword may have been forged by men, but the hand that shaped the warrior, that was a woman's. You wouldn't need a man to speak for you in Sparta. Not in court, not in business, not even in the city square. You could act in your own name, sign contracts, manage land, and defend yourself with words as sharp as steel. This wasn't some rare exception in the ancient world. This was daily life for a Spartan woman. And while outsiders gawked, judged, and scribbled bitter critiques, within Sparta itself, it simply worked. Writers from beyond its borders couldn't make sense of it. Philosophers like Aristotle grumbled that Spartan women were indulgent, unruly, too powerful for their own good. But beneath his words was unease, a discomfort rooted in seeing women possess more economic power than many men of his own city. While Athens tried to hide its women behind walls and rules, Sparta handed its daughters the reins of inheritance, education, and command. It wasn't a progressive experiment. It was necessity refined into tradition. Men were warriors, often absent, often dead. Someone had to keep the engine of the state turning, and that someone was the woman left behind. She didn't just maintain the home. She managed the economy. She kept Sparta breathing. This wasn't a revolution in ideology. It was the cold efficiency of survival. But the outcome? Women who were literate, assertive, and financially autonomous. They didn't just marry soldiers. They funded the system that trained them. And in a place so obsessed with discipline and combat, you'd expect vanity to fade into the background. But it didn't. Spartan women were anything but plain. They were radiant with strength. Beauty here wasn't defined by fragility or paleness. It was measured by stamina, sun-kissed skin, and the graceful power of a body honed by motion. In a world where women elsewhere cloaked themselves in fabric and silence, Spartan women moved freely. They walked uncovered through the city, confident and unashamed, their bodies telling stories of athleticism, not modesty. To other Greeks, their short dresses and exposed limbs were scandalous. But to Spartans, they were practical, designed for freedom of movement, for the real work of life. Their clothing wasn't a trap. It was a tool. And hair, left long and loose, wasn't mere vanity. It was a signal of adulthood and independence. No layers of paint hid their features. Spartan women didn't wear beauty, they wore it. Not in ornaments, but in posture, in pride, in the raw vitality of someone unafraid to be seen. They weren't tucked into shadows. They were front and center at festivals, religious rites, athletic contests. They danced, sang in public, and yes, even competed. Where other cities measured a woman's worth by her silence, Sparta measured it by the strength in her voice and the wisdom in her words. That visibility was jarring to the rest of Greece. But here it wasn't audacity. It was virtue. Spartan women weren't raised to be ornaments. They were raised to be seen, to lead, to speak, and when needed, to strike with words as cleanly as a blade. And when they spoke, no one forgot it. They were educated from childhood, not just in the arts, but in the rhythm of rhetoric. They read, they wrote, they composed poetry and music. But above all, they mastered the weapon of speech. In a culture that honored sharpness in both mind and body, their voices were tools of command. And when they spoke, even the boldest men often paused. History is littered with their one-liners, replies that cut straight to the bone. A mother, upon hearing her son died bravely, said, "I gave him life for that very purpose." Another, hearing her son fled battle, snapped, "Why do you still live?" It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. These women were forged in a system where survival of the state outweighed the softness of sentiment. They weren't heartless. They were focused. Their strength extended to their families. If a husband showed cowardice, she might be the first to mock him. If a son fell in glorious battle, she'd be publicly honored. The currency of love was sacrifice, and that sacrifice earned not pity, but near-sacred respect. A Spartan woman didn't chase beauty. She embodied it. She didn't whisper support from the sidelines. She spoke directly, decisively. Her love was fierce, her pride unshakable. And if your idea of ancient womanhood is timid, sweet, and softly spoken, Sparta will shatter that illusion with a single sentence. So as your eyes grow heavy and you slip into rest, carry this image with you. Not of queens on thrones or priestesses in temples, but of women walking unflinching through the heart of a warrior city. Hair free, feet firm, and voices like thunder in a world that told them to be quiet. They didn't listen, and they were never meant to. You didn't need to hide your voice to be honored in Sparta. You needed to sharpen it. Here, strength of character wasn't just a masculine trait. It was carved into the very identity of Spartan womanhood. Your tongue was a blade, your presence a declaration, and the rest of Greece couldn't stop talking about it. From the dusty markets of Corinth to the philosophical forums of Athens, Spartan women were the subject of endless commentary, and often thinly veiled contempt. They called you bold, unfeminine, disobedient, but Sparta didn't shape women to win approval. It shaped them to raise warriors, command attention, and speak with the weight of certainty. In a society built on resilience, silence wasn't a virtue. It was a warning sign. And if you had a cutting remark ready for a cowardly husband or a disappointing son, that wasn't rudeness. That was expected. You weren't raised to be a whisper behind the curtain. You were raised to be a sentinel at the gate. Even in legend, the Spartan woman refuses to fade into background roles. She wasn't just a mother or a wife. She was a force of nature, a guardian of discipline, a battlefield tactician of the tongue. In a city obsessed with physical strength, the verbal sparring of women was just another form of combat, and it was often just as devastating. And when it came to marriage, Sparta bent the rules most societies refused to question. Love, that was optional. Duty, that was sacred. While most of ancient Greece saw fidelity as a one-way street, liberty for the man, confinement for the woman, Sparta made exceptions. If a husband grew old, weak, or simply absent too often, the priority wasn't jealousy. It was continuity. The next generation of warriors couldn't be risked for romance. So some couples, with quiet consent or state encouragement, made arrangements. A wife might bear a child with a stronger man. A husband might lend his wife to one. There were no love triangles, no scandal, just statecraft disguised as intimacy. To outsiders, it seemed strange. To Spartans, it was survival. And while these arrangements were not common for all, they were accepted among the Spartiates, the elite class of full citizens. Every child born into their ranks was a potential soldier, a national asset, and so choices around reproduction were often strategic, practical, planned with more logic than longing. This didn't mean free love. It meant that even private desires were aligned with public purpose. Outside the elite, these freedoms didn't extend far. Helots and lower classes weren't part of these decisions. But for citizen women, this rare sexual autonomy was revolutionary in a world obsessed with guarding female purity. While other Greek women were locked away to preserve their virtue, Spartan women were trusted to make decisions that would benefit the state. Their bodies weren't shameful, they were tools of legacy. Children weren't just blessings. They were building blocks of Sparta's future. And long after Sparta's glory faded, its women lived on in the imagination of history, strong, unapologetic, and radically different from their contemporaries. Writers from rival cities tried to reduce them, portraying them as strange, dangerous, or too powerful. But their impact refused to be silenced. A Spartan woman wasn't just admired for her beauty. She was admired for what her beauty meant. Strength, health, and the discipline to command herself fully. She didn't wait for a man to represent her. She negotiated. She taught. She governed. And she knew exactly what she was worth. She gave birth not just to sons, but to soldiers. She didn't wait to be remembered. She made sure she would be. Her very life defied the norms of ancient womanhood. In a time when women were expected to listen, she spoke. In a world that told women to stay hidden, she walked proudly in the open. And while the system that gave her this autonomy was built on military necessity, her legacy outlived it, becoming a paradox that still fascinates historians to this day. She was no modern feminist, no champion of personal freedom for its own sake. But within the iron cage of Spartan order, she carved out power, carved out presence, and left a mark on history that even centuries of patriarchal commentary couldn't erase. So as you let your eyes grow heavy and the world softens into sleep, let her echo guide you. Hear her voice, not whispering, but steady and clear, like a spear striking bronze. She was raised not to please, but to shape, not to yield, but to endure. And long after the shields fell silent, her strength still speaks. You weren't just part of your husband's tale in Sparta. You were the story's backbone, the one who made sure homes didn't crumble, fields didn't rot, and the next wave of warriors kept marching forward. You weren't a shadow on the wall behind the spear. You were the strategist in the quiet, the force behind the discipline. In a world that often silenced its women, the Spartan woman was an undeniable roar. While other societies wrapped femininity in silence, you lived it out loud, in authority, in action, in legacy. You didn't inherit freedom by chance. You forged it through necessity. And somehow, within one of the most unyielding systems ever known, your voice didn't vanish. It flourished. You didn't rebel against the system. You mastered it so well that even your restraint commanded respect. Your sharp mind wasn't hidden. It was a weapon. Your estate wasn't a burden. It was a fortress. And your tongue could strike truer than any blade. In Sparta, death itself was a final examination, not a sorrowful departure. It wasn't dressed in layers of mourning or carved in marble sentimentality. No weeping processions, no golden tombs, just a final, solemn question whispered by the land itself. Did this person live and die in service to the state? If the answer was yes, then, and only then, was their name remembered. Only 2 deaths earned names in stone: warriors fallen in battle and women who died in childbirth. For everyone else, merchants, craftsmen, even revered elders, the grave was anonymous. And that wasn't dishonor. It was Spartan logic. Sparta didn't glorify comfort. It immortalized sacrifice. For men, the battlefield was sacred. A fall during war wasn't tragic. It was transcendent. To die grasping your shield meant you had fulfilled your purpose. If you dropped it, you hadn't just failed yourself. You had failed your brothers. That's why a Spartan mother would send her son to war with one message: return with your shield or on it. Because in this society, survival was not the measure of honor. Standing your ground was, and for women, their battlefield was the birthing chamber. A woman who died in childbirth was believed to have given everything, her strength, her life, for the future of Sparta. Her name, like the fallen warriors, would be etched in stone, a permanent testament, not to her pain but to her purpose. This wasn't a culture that romanticized death. It was one that used it as the ultimate filter, separating the useful from the unforgettable. Public mourning was brief. Loud wailing was discouraged. Even in grief, there was discipline. Even in loss, there was structure. The only question that mattered was, how did they serve? What did their final breath offer the state? In this cold calculus, dying was not feared. It was optimized. A warrior's funeral was stripped bare. No painted vases. No marble guardians. Just a name, maybe a symbol, and the silence that follows a life lived in full commitment. The body wasn't the monument. The memory was. No stories of luxury. No epic tales of pleasure. Just one lasting truth. They stood their ground. Spartan glory didn't come from winning battles. It came from staying in them. That's why tales of the 300 echo louder than the triumphs of empire. They didn't win. They stood. And in that refusal to flee, they became immortal, not as victors, but as vessels of loyalty so fierce it burned through death itself. You didn't need to be loved by history to live forever in Sparta. You only needed to belong to it. And so as your breathing slows and sleep begins to take hold, remember this. You're drifting into a world where valor wasn't gilded. It was stripped bare. Where legacy wasn't dressed in flowers. It was forged in fire. And where the quiet footsteps of a Spartan woman were as powerful as the war drums of her sons. You've just walked through a world where names weren't handed out. They were earned. You didn't need a marble statue to be remembered in Sparta. Just a name, etched in stone, and a life that served the state without hesitation. While other cities honored poets and politicians with towering tombs and weeping crowds, Sparta carved its tributes with silence and simplicity. There were no flutes playing at grave sites, no scrolls of poetry mourning the dead. Just a name that told the world this person gave everything for something greater than themselves. You might think that in a city obsessed with war, women faded into the background. But that was never true in Sparta. While they didn't carry spears onto the battlefield, they carried life into the world, and that was no less sacred. The woman who bore children for Sparta held a weighty responsibility, one that the state acknowledged with rare reverence. If she died in childbirth, she earned what few ever did, a marked grave. Her death, like a soldier's, was a sacrifice. That chiseled name didn't just honor her passing. It declared her allegiance. The majority of Spartans were buried without recognition. Even the respected, the wise, the hardworking, were laid to rest in anonymity unless their death served Sparta directly. For men, that meant falling in battle. For women, it meant giving life and paying the ultimate price in the process. Death here wasn't just an ending, it was an evaluation. Girls in Sparta weren't raised on lullabies and lace. They were raised to be strong, prepared not just for life, but for labor. Physical training wasn't vanity, it was policy. A strong woman produced strong sons, and the strength of the next generation was Sparta's most prized asset. So discipline began early. Health wasn't just personal, it was national. A Spartan woman's worth wasn't defined by how gently she spoke or how modestly she moved. It was measured in legacies. The warriors she raised, the estate she governed, the strength she carried through pain without complaint. And should she pass while delivering the future of Sparta, her death was honored like a hero's. To outsiders, it seemed savage. To Sparta, it was sacred. And so, her name carved into the stone. Not with gold, not with praise, but with the silent weight of acknowledgement. She had done her part. She had stood her ground. Her funeral wouldn't be filled with music or showy rituals. No parades, no wailing, no weeping throngs. Just a simple burial, often within 24 hours, quiet and brief. Grief wasn't forbidden. It was disciplined. There were limits on who could mourn publicly, who could wear black, even how long the mourning could last. Emotional restraint didn't mean hearts didn't break. It just meant the city came first, even in death. The men who fell in war were carried by comrades, wrapped in their cloak, laid upon their shield. Women, too, were buried simply without ornament or jewelry. No flashy tombs, just earth and memory. If her name appeared at all, it was enough. No epitaphs, no grand declarations, just the enduring whisper of stone. She belonged to Sparta. Cremation was rare. The dead were returned to the soil, as if even in death, their bodies were meant to serve, feeding the land that had once demanded so much from them. Children were taught from an early age not to grieve loudly. They didn't collapse when their father fell in war, they stood straighter. They didn't weep when their mother died in childbirth. They honored her by becoming strong, by continuing what she began. Because in Sparta, a funeral was not a crescendo, it was a single solemn note. One that signaled not an end, but a beginning. A transition from action to legacy. A final act in service to something eternal. And that's what made death meaningful here, not how it looked, but what it meant. So tonight, as you lie still, letting your thoughts settle like dust on ancient stone, remember this. In Sparta, the greatest honor wasn't found in marble or song. It was found in living and dying for something larger than yourself. In standing firm even when your knees buckled. in giving life even when it cost your own, in choosing discipline over comfort, and silence over spectacle. You're resting now in the echo of a city that believed true glory wasn't loud. It was loyal. You carry more than memories when you hold a Spartan shield or trace the threads of a burial cloth. You're touching the very soul of a civilization. In Sparta, these two objects were more than tools. They were emblems of legacy. One forged in iron, the other spun in silence. One was meant to protect, the other to preserve. But both spoke the same truth. This life, however brief, had purpose. You see, the Spartan shield wasn't just about defense. It wasn't something you dropped in panic or replaced when scratched. It was sacred, not because it guarded the bearer, but because it guarded the phalanx, the line. To lose your shield was to expose your brother, and that was unforgivable. That's why the phrase, "return with your shield or on it," cut deeper than any threat. It wasn't metaphor, it was commandment. When a warrior fell, his shield became his final resting place. Bloodied and bruised, it bore him home not as a casualty, but as proof. This man did